So now that we maybe have a better understanding of what life is, let's talk a little bit about how we think it may have actually gotten started on planet Earth. Where did it all start? Well, we know that life has to have an energy source, either chemical nutrient or light from the sun that provides the resources for photosynthesis. And if those things got started on Earth, did it possibly happen elsewhere in our universe? Well, Darwin believed that life got started on Earth in what he called a warm little pond. He said we could conceive in some warm little pond with all sorts of ammonia and phosphoric salts, light, heat, electricity, etc. present, that a protein compound was chemically formed ready to undergo still more complex changes. This comes from a letter that he wrote back in 1871. He kind of pictured this scenic little pond provided with all of the chemical nutrients it needed and energy, perhaps in the form of electricity from lightning, creating this circumstance where life could arise. Another possibility comes in the form of hydrothermal vents. Remember, these black smokers are deep sea vents releasing not only vast amounts of hot water, but water that is fortified with chemical nutrients, including sulfur and iron, which some bacteria use for nutrients. So instead of photosynthetic processes using light to make food, they're using chemosynthetic processes. And chemicals collecting around these vents would be held in a relatively small area by the cold water, allowing some sort of community to develop. Impact craters are another possible site for the formation of life on Earth. These impacting events heat up the rock in the area. You can see in the lower picture the impact ejecta, the material that's thrown out, as one part of the surrounding area, but also the portion in the center of the crater that is warmer because it's actually been melted by the high temperatures from that kinetic energy of the impact. And so as this rock is heated, it actually heats up groundwater below the crater, and this could actually create an environment where Darwin's warm little pond may have existed. Beaches are another possibility, since we have lots of rock cracks and crevices where tides moving in and out are moving around different types of chemicals, including different salts from the ocean. Reactions could be occurring in these rock cracks and crevices that allow for the formation of life. Another is volcanic hot springs. Here we see modern life existing in volcanic hot springs, these thermophilic extremophile bacteria that really like these hot areas. Chemical compounds in these areas could be serving as the basis of the food chain in these communities. Still another possibility exists that bubbles coming up from the seafloor, like hydrogen, methane, carbon monoxide does in modern times, these bubbles coming up from below the surface of the water, reaching the surface, would release gases into the atmosphere when these bubbles burst. In the presence of ultraviolet radiation provided by the sun, we could actually create new chemicals falling back down into the water, reacting further to create beneficial circumstances. So in which circumstance did life arise on Earth? All of them? None of them? Any particular one more likely than the other? Well, we don't have any evidence to prove any of these, but they all serve as definite possibilities. Most methods, though, do seem to favor the idea of the thermophiles being first, that these hot, hostile environments were probably the first case. But other theories favor the psychrophiles, the cold-loving organisms, as having been first, concentrated between ice crystals. The basics that we need to consider is that we need to keep an open mind, that it could be any of these, but it could be none of these. And other ideas even consider that we might not even be from planet Earth. We actually could be from Mars. Now really, is it possible that life could be transferred from one planet to another? Well, it is a distinct possibility, and many astrobiologists really work on the fact that we may have already contaminated worlds with Earth bacteria in sending rovers and other spacecraft to other planets. So is it possible that contamination could have happened the other way around, with life from other worlds contaminating Earth? Well, we know that certainly life moves on the Earth, whether it's birds flying or fish swimming or seeds of a dandelion being blown in the wind. But is it possible to move life from one planet to another? The idea of panspermia comes predominantly from a couple of specific scientists who believed that microbes or single-celled organisms could actually be pushed through space by solar radiation or even could hitch a ride on meteorites. In the picture on the right, you see the Allan Hills meteorite that actually came from Mars. We have actual samples of Mars here on Earth that came in the form of meteorites from impacting events when asteroids or other comets hit the planet Mars. When we first found the Allan Hills meteorite, we believed that there were some formations in it that could have been fossils. And though most scientists now believe that those actually are not fossils, is it possible that material coming from Mars could carry living cells? In order for that to happen, an organism must survive its launch from its planet of origin into space. In the upper image, you see crater Tycho on the moon, which showing the rays of the ejecta material that would be similar to what would have launched the Allan Hills meteorite from Mars. The lower picture shows some NASA experiments with what are called light gas guns, showing that it is actually possible for microbes to survive the energy of a launch. Then after launch, the microbes would have to survive their trip through space. Experiments done on the ISS, including the one with the tardigrades that we talked about in the last section, showed that bacteria can actually survive in space for over a year. Even in the absence of air, in the presence of large amounts of radiation, they survive. Then finally, the bacteria would have to survive atmospheric reentry. Coming to Earth, the rock would be superheated as it encounters all the particles of the atmosphere, but that's for a pretty brief period of time. The interior of that rock may actually remain cool enough for bacteria to survive. So could it happen? Absolutely. Did it happen? We don't know, but it is possible. Though Mars in its current situation doesn't appear to support life, evidence shows that it may have been much more hospitable of an environment in the past. And we found about 100 different Martian meteorites from throughout history, so we know that material has been coming from Mars for a large period of Earth's history. Maybe we are all Martians. And so the central question of astrobiology is, how do we get from these chemicals, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur, to life? And where did these basic building blocks actually come from? So what are some of the possibilities regarding the origin of life on Earth? Some people believe in creationism, that life is of a supernatural origin, or that there was some sort of divine intervention that created life on Earth. Others believe in panspermia, that life originated elsewhere and then came to Earth, but that still doesn't solve the problem of how it originated in that other location. And others still believe that life itself originated on Earth, but regardless of what you believe, the building blocks of life had to get here from somewhere. One of the earliest experiments was done by Harold Urey and Stanley Miller back in 1952. In their chemistry lab, they basically created a test to see if some combination of boiling water, different variations of atmospheric gases, and electricity could create some of these early building blocks, the amino acids that build up to make proteins. Their experiment looked like this. We have a heat source that is representing the sun or a hydrothermal vent, water being the ocean, different atmospheric gases in this reservoir up here with an electrical spark to simulate lightning. Then they had a sampling probe where they could take out different materials, add different materials, including water, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, that all at the time were considered to be what they believed the major components of the atmosphere at that time. After several days, they actually were able to see a result, a yellow kind of tar-like substance produced in their flasks. And so when they analyzed this yellow material, they realized that they had actually produced amino acids and other chemical compounds, that you actually can create the building blocks of life in relatively simple experiments. Now, even though now we believe that they used the wrong atmospheric compounds, that rather than some of the gases that they used, it should have been carbon dioxide and nitrogen, it does show that these building blocks can form from chemical reactions and processes. And these building blocks actually are found present in meteorites. We found sugars, we found amino acids, and we found all sorts of other building block type materials in different meteoritic samples, meaning that they don't just form here on Earth, but all throughout the entire universe. Now, with the case of living things, we have nucleic acids, either the DNA or RNA information that living things use to store their genetic codes. So, here we see examples of both the single-strand RNA and the double-stranded DNA that use the different nucleic acid bases. Remember, cytosine, guanine, adenine are common to both, and then DNA uses thymine, where RNA uses uracil. So, there are some major differences between DNA and RNA. But another major difference is that RNA can self-assemble into molecules called ribozymes. These can actually carry out chemical reactions on their own and can even duplicate themselves. So it's possible that life actually originated in an RNA world. It's kind of like the question, what came first, the chicken or the egg? A chicken lays an egg, and eggs come from chickens. So which one came first? Did proteins from amino acids or RNA come first? Maybe RNA was first, reacting and replicating in these pools of water and eventually leading to early cells. But how? We actually need membranes to enclose these cells, so where did the membranes come from? It turns out membranes can actually come from meteorites. They're actually made very easily. If you add a meteorite to water, you get membranes. And what happens is lipids are the building blocks of membranes of cells here on Earth, and these are actually also found in meteorites. And they form spontaneously when the meteorites are added to water. The hydrophilic and hydrophobic, the ones that both like and are repelled by water, line up automatically. And so, if we have the building blocks, we have the membranes, we have all the ingredients we need for early cells, once these building blocks are actually enclosed within the membranes. And if RNA can self-replicate, then it's possible that these early cells would have been capable of binary fission, which is how bacterial cells reproduce today, starting out as a single individual cell and then splitting into two. And in addition to having uncertainties about how life arose on this planet, we also don't know if there might be alternative chemistries elsewhere in the universe. Again, even though we have several hypotheses about what happened here, we don't know for sure. And we don't know that all life in the universe would even be chemically identical to life on Earth. Remember, life on Earth is carbon-based, with the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the lipids all having that carbon backbone. But is it possible that carbon doesn't have to be the backbone of living things in other organisms? Well, carbon backbone is very easy to build because carbon has 4 valence electrons, and so other things can bond to it relatively easily. It's the versatility of carbon's 4 valence electrons, half the 8 necessary for bonding, that makes it very versatile. But carbon is not the only element that has only 4 valence electrons. What about silicon, the element immediately below it in the periodic table? Is it possible that there are silicon-based organisms elsewhere in the universe? English writer H.G. Wells once stated, "One is startled toward fantastic imaginings. versions of silicon aluminum organisms wandering through an atmosphere of gaseous sulfur, let us say, by the shores of a sea of liquid iron, some 1,000 degrees or so above the temperature of a blast furnace. It sounds pretty cool, but is it possible that there would be these alternative chemistries? There actually are some downsides to a silicon battery. First off, the mineral quartz and sand are among the most common silicon compounds, and silicon forms incredibly stable compounds with oxygen. Whenever oxygen is around, silicon is most likely to form either sand or quartz, which is not a super great material for living things to be made from. But would it be possible on a planet with very low oxygen? Maybe, but any oxygen present is going to create silicate rocks, so probably not. Silicon is also very reactive. In the first diagram, we have an image of the molecule CH4, methane, which can burn, and we burn it in our Bunsen burners. But silane, which is the silicon version of a SiH4 molecule, ignites at room temperature, much more volatile than methane, so again, not super great for life. And other elements aren't much better. The first two columns of the periodic table, the alkali and alkaline earth metals, are ultra-reactive and only bond with certain other elements. Noble gases, on the far right of the periodic table, are not reactive at all. And many other nonmetals and metalloids don't form enough bonds with other atoms to form the complex molecules required for life. So maybe carbon is best as a backbone, but what about water? We talk about water being necessary for life on Earth, but is it necessary to follow the water? We call water the universal solvent because so many things can dissolve in it. But could life elsewhere actually use a different solvent? We've already talked about Titan, one of the moons of Saturn, having lakes of methane. Is it possible that there are little fish swimming around in lakes of methane rather than in lakes of water? Well, we know that water freezes in a hexagonal shape, allowing air to be trapped in between the atoms, allowing ice to float rather than sink. And this allows living things on Earth to remain alive in winter in lakes and rivers because the water freezes from the top down rather than from the bottom. Water can also stay liquid at a wide range of temperatures, meaning that anywhere between 0 and 100 Celsius, we have liquid water. Reactions can take place at this wide range of temperatures. But what about with other liquids? Ammonia, like water, can actually also dissolve a lot of different kinds of materials, but it has a much narrower range of temperatures at which it exists at a liquid. Also, it sinks when it freezes. Hydrogen fluoride, in addition to ammonia, can dissolve a wide variety of substances and has a wide range of temperatures at which it's a liquid, so that may seem better initially, but it is 100,000 times less abundant than oxygen in the universe, so its rarity presents a problem. So though maybe water isn't the only solvent, it is much more abundant and much more versatile than most of the other choices. We don't see a lot of other kinds of things abundant enough on planets in our solar system that makes these alternate chemistries likely. So is it possible? Yes, but probably not particularly likely. And finally, what makes a planet habitable? We've already talked about the probable need for liquid water, the definite need for an energy source, whether it comes from the parent star or from some kind of chemical welling up from within the planet, because everything needs a source of nutrients. They also need physical conditions suitable for life. So we're looking for things that exist in the habitable or that Goldilocks zone. Not too close and not too far from the star, just right for whatever liquid solvent, particularly water, that we're using. But keep in mind that the zone varies depending on the star. If we have a very hot star, that green habitable zone is going to be much farther away from the star than if we have a much cooler red star. Keep in mind, though, that water can exist outside the habitable zone. Remember, moons like Jupiter's Europa and Saturn's Enceladus do harbor liquid water beneath their icy surfaces. and whether it's radioactivity or tidal forces flexing these moons as they pass by their parent planet, the waters inside are warm enough that the water is a liquid. But in addition to these physical characteristics, the rock cycle and plate tectonics is probably also necessary. Recycling of rock materials, especially carbon on this planet that's trapped within them, is probably important for a planet's habitability in addition to its temperature. Wild temperature variations would be problematic. It's good that Earth has such a large moon as a percent of the mass of the system because it stabilizes Earth's tilt. If Earth tilted wildly from one extreme to another, these amazing differences in temperature would create a situation where very few organisms would be able to withstand the seasonal changes. The final major consideration is a planet's emissivity, or energy retention. Think about the differences between a mirror and a black substance, one that reflects and one that absorbs most of the energy that hits it. Planets, depending on their composition, whether they are predominantly gas or liquid or solid, and depending on the material, will vary in emissivity. Emissivity values rate between 0 and 1. 0 would be a shiny mirror that reflects most things, all the way up to 1 that would be a black body absorbing and retaining heat much better. You're going to consider all of these differences in mini project number 3. You're going to play with an app called Blue Marble. This app asks you to compare distance to parent star, luminosity or brightness of a star, emissivity, and average temperature of planets, and try to create as many habitable worlds as possible. Play with the app and see how many habitable planets you can find, and fill out your activity sheet showing each planet's distance, star's luminosity, emissivity, and average temperature of the planet. Your data sheet looks like this, and if you need your app reset, please let me know.